Hi there, I'm Sam and I build camper vans. This video is going to be a review about this hinge, which is the Utrusta horizontal door hinge from Ikea, a hinge that's specifically made for upper cabinet doors like this. I'm going to cover what's good about this hinge, what's bad about this hinge, and also what some alternative options are. What this video won't cover is how to install the hinge because I went over that in detail in my last video. Lastly, this review is in no way sponsored by Ikea. I bought these with my own money, and these are my genuine thoughts about this hinge after installing 4 pairs of them along this upper cabinet. Alright, let's hop into the pros and cons. So the first pro about this hinge, and it's kind of immediately apparent right when you take it out of the box, is that it's a well-made hinge. Just the build quality feels really good. It's solid, it feels durable, and I've heard from others that they hold up for a really long time in camper vans, which is a hard environment. These things are bouncing down the road and they put a lot of wear and tear on components. So no concerns with these. Build quality seems really good. The next thing that's really nice about this hinge is that it holds the door open on its own. And it also has an adjustment here so you can set how high or low you want that door to stay held up at. This means that you don't have to install a separate gas strut or something else to keep the door open. The hinge does that all on its own. The next thing is that the hinge is soft close, so you can throw this thing down and it kind of has the damper inside, so then it slowly pulls it shut. You still need to remember to lock the door, but other than that, I think the soft close does have a really nice feel to it. Now, probably my favorite thing about the hinge is how adjustable it is, which is really handy during the install. So I already mentioned that you can adjust the height the door sits at when it's fully open, but there's also a couple other adjustment screws on here to move it in 3 different directions. So for each side of the hinge, you can adjust it up, down, left, right, and then in, out. Additionally, you can adjust for the weight of the door. So what that means is when you're setting up doors along a whole set like this, even if your mounting points were slightly off, you have adjustments so you can get all these doors to align where the bottoms are level, your gaps are even, and they're just really easy to adjust. Also, that means if over time stuff shifts a little with the cabinet frame, you can go in and readjust and just have all your doors looking nice and square. The next thing that I think is nice, and again, this one really just comes in handy during the install of the door, is that it's easy to separate the door from the hinge. It's got these quick releases, and then it just pops out of place. So there's a bracket on the door, and then that clips in and out of the main part of the hinge. So once you're ready to put it on, you just align it over those brackets, tilt the back in, and then secure the front part of the clip, and then the door is on there and good to go. So easy to pop the doors on and off. Always a nice feature in a hinge. Next up, and this is a small detail, but it's really nice, and that's at where the holes are for mounting the hinge to the cabinet with screws. There's 2 holes side by side in both the front and in the back. What this means is if you have a setup like this, where you have one piece of material and you need to put a hinge on both sides of that, you can use the front hole on one side, you can use the back hole on the other side, and your screws aren't going to hit each other. So here I have 1/2 inch material. That means the screw needs to go most of the way through that material to have adequate hold, which if I had 2 that were in the exact same place and there was only 1 screw hole, I couldn't do that. The screws would collide. I'd have to make this panel thicker basically to make up for it. But since there's these 2 offset holes, I can alternate which one I use, and then that's no problem for mounting them back to back like this. And that ties into the next thing I really like about this hinge, which is that it has no problem working with 1/2 inch material. So not all door hinges play super great with 1/2 inch material, and in particularly the Euro style cabinet hinge that has the cup that you have to drill into the door, those usually aren't compatible with 1/2 inch because that cup depth you have to drill is just too deep. The bracket that goes on the door is some Skitals with short screws. I was able to do it with some 3/8 inch screws, so it goes into the 1/2 inch door, no problem. A typical kind of Euro hinge like you'd see on a cabinet usually needs at least a 5/8 inch thick material for the doors. I typically buy my plywood in just 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch, and I really don't like having to make the doors 3/4 inches just to use a certain type of hinge. And so I like that these have no problems with the 1/2 inch and it all plays well together. Since this is a camper van, I'm trying to keep the overall weight down of things, which we'll talk about weight more in a second, but being able to use 1/2 inch plywood for all my front door panels helps with that. Last thing I have on my list of pros is that the hinge looks nice, and that's mostly due to these snap-on covers. So here's what the hinge looks like on its own, but they come with these plastic covers that just fit right over the top, and then after that it's pretty nice, pretty polished looking, just has a little bit of exposed metal there, but it's a good looking hinge. It blends right into the rest of the cabinet, about as good as you can expect for a hinge. Okay, so that was a long list of pros, but that's all I got, but a lot of good for this hinge. Now, before I get to my cons, I wanted to go over something that I listed just as neutral, and that's the install process. So depending on your cabinet design and if it uses 3/4 inch thick materials and has a square top, or if it's thinner and has an angled top, the install could be easier or harder. The hinge is designed to have a very simple install where it comes with a template for drilling these door brackets, and it has easy alignment tabs for where you position the hinge on the cabinet itself. So it is set up to have an easy install. In my case, there are a few factors that complicated that. The first was that since my top of my cabinet here is angled, and that's to match the curve of the ceiling here, I couldn't get the hinge as high up as it was supposed to mount. And so it ended up a little lower, which meant I had to adjust the position of this door bracket to account for that. The second thing was that template for drilling the holes for these door brackets is meant to work so that you have a full overlay on a cabinet that has a 3/4 inch frame. I have a thinner frame, and beyond that, between these two doors, I only have a single divider, and that means I just need a much smaller overlay. So I had to calculate and adjust where to place that template to account for that. I covered all those details in my last video. Overall, it's really not a bad hinge to install. I feel like any hinge the first time you install it is a little tricky to figure out, so not really any better or worse in that regard. And now for the cons. First being that these hinges are not cheap. A pair is $43 a piece, so for however many doors you have on your upper cabinets, it's going to be 43 times that, which is not cheap for hinges, but you do get good build quality, good adjustability, and solid hinge. The next con is that these hinges are really heavy. Again, you pick it up, you feel it, feels solid, but that also means it's a heavy hinge. So when I weighed these, just the hinge itself was about 700 grams or a little bit over, which is about 1.5 pounds. When I added in the door mounting bracket, all the screws needed for install, and the snap-on cover, and then stuck it on the scale, it came in at 809 grams, which is 1.78 pounds. You multiply that 2 for a pair, and you're at about 1.6 kilograms, or about 3.5 pounds per hinge pair, which kind of is a lot of weight for a hinge. So in this van overall, I'm going to have 5 upper cabinet doors. These 4 here, and then there'll be another one over on this side. So that's 17.5 pounds just in hinges alone. It's pretty heavy. Is it a showstopper heavy? No, not for me, because I like everything else about this hinge. In the grand scheme of this whole build, I don't think that's, a deal breaker amount of weight. Like I said, it did allow me to do other things like use a thinner door panel here, but just something I wanted to note. It's a heavy hinge. And that's really all I have for cons about this hinge. So it's expensive and it's heavy. Everything else about it, I really like. Next, I want to talk about what some alternative options are if you want to look for a different upper cabinet hinge. And I think there's 2 main routes you can go with this. The first would be just to get a simple standard cabinet hinge. So like in this case, you could use a frameless full overlay Euro hinge, and you'd want 2 of those for a door this size, but those aren't going to hold the door up. even the ones that are soft close or have a spring, they're not going to be able to hold the weight of a door. So that means you also need to add a gas strut that's going to support the door. For a door this size, you typically just need one gas strut. You wouldn't need one on both sides, but it's something else. So keep that in mind for the cost of that extra piece, and it's just another thing that can be a little harder to install. Another alternative for a different hinge is a lift up hinge that has a spring built in for holding up the door, and I'll throw an example on the screen of what I'm talking about. I've used hinges like this a couple times, and overall they worked well. The hinge mechanism itself is a lot simpler. That just means it's less adjustable. So there is some adjustment by kind of just tapping and slightly moving the mounting position, but nowhere near the adjustability of this. You also can't adjust how high the door sits. So the last ones I used, the doors did sit a little lower, but they're cheaper, they're lighter, and they do the job pretty decently. So that's a good alternative. I do want to point out that while I ordered this hinge through the Ikea website, and while it says Ikea right here on it, that I believe the hinge is actually made by Blum, and it even has Blum printed here on the corner of the cover plate. I did a separate search looking for the Blum version of the hinge, and I found it as part of their Aventos product line. What I noticed though is that from most suppliers, the original Blum version, the Blum Aventos, sells for more than what Ikea sells this version for. Nonetheless, Blum is known for making really high quality cabinet hinges and cabinet drawer slides, so all good there. Alright, so that's most of my thoughts on this hinge. I can go ahead and wrap this up. In conclusion, or would I use this hinge again? Yes, absolutely. Unless I'm just really looking for a way to keep the overall budget of a build down, I think this will be my go-to hinge for upper cabinets. At least for now. I could discover a different hinge in the future, but I'm really happy with these. Alright, and that's all I got for this one. If you haven't seen it, I have a full video about how I built this upper cabinet here, as well as a set of build plans that go along with the video and the cabinet construction. Alright, thanks for watching. Bye.